He was a highly decorated police sergeant who spent an entire year risking his life to save strangers, only to come home and discover his own children slowly fading away right in his backyard. He once believed his wife was an angel. Little did he know she was starving their son and poisoning their baby girl, exploiting their pain just to record their suffering for profit. He faced dangers head-on for the world, but to confront true evil, he had to step through his own garden gate. And when his loyal dog crashed through that fence, the badge was meaningless. What mattered now was only the father's heart. What lay beyond those rose bushes will shatter you, but his relentless fight for justice will heal your very soul. Before we jump in, drop a comment with the country you're watching from. I want to know where this story is reaching, and if you believe a father's love is the most powerful force in the world. Smash that subscribe button, because this officer is about to deliver the kind of justice that will grip your heart like never before. The afternoon sun blanketed the city of Oak Haven in a warm, golden embrace, gently heating the sidewalks and stretching long, tranquil shadows across perfectly manicured lawns. It was the kind of flawless day when the temperature sat comfortably at 68 degrees, and the air carried the faint scents of freshly cut grass and blooming jasmine. Oak Haven was a place that thrived on its peace, a town of wide avenues and white picket fences, where trouble felt like a distant myth that only flickered on the evening news. Sergeant Gage steered his worn pickup truck along the familiar streets, his heart pounding a fierce tempo that had nothing to do with the caffeine pumping through his veins. He was a man hewn from stone and weariness, his jaw hidden beneath a thick, rugged beard grown over a year of undercover toil in a neighboring state. His eyes, usually sharp and vigilant, were now softened by a fragile, aching hope. Riding shotgun was Rook. This imposing German shepherd was more than just a dog. He was a partner, a weapon, and a trusted friend. Cloaked in deep black and rich tan fur, Rook sat with soldier-like discipline. His ears twitched towards the open window, catching the familiar scents of home. "Almost there, buddy," Gage murmured, his voice raw from disuse and fatigue. He reached over to scratch the dog's ears gently. "You ready to see Jace? Ready to meet the little one, right?" Rook responded with a low whine, shifting slightly in his seat. Gage's eyes drifted to the two brightly wrapped presents resting on the floorboard. He'd spent a small fortune on them, all the overtime and hazard pay he had scrimped together. For Jace, his 5-year-old son, he'd bought a top-tier pair of running shoes, neon green and black. Mara, his wife, had sent glowing emails about Jace joining the junior track team. She wrote about how fast he was running, how he was leaving the other kids far behind. Gage smiled, picturing his son's face lighting up with joy. He could almost see Jace sprinting across the backyard, strong and full of life. And for Ivy, the daughter he barely held before duty, pulled him away. There was a walking doll, a high-tech toy that could toddle across the room. Mara had sent photos often blurry or filtered, claiming Ivy was already walking at 14 months, a little prodigy just like her brother. Gage felt a sharp pang of guilt cut through him. He had missed the first steps. He had missed the first words. But now he was back here for good. He turned the truck onto Elm Street. The main road leading into his subdivision stretched ahead, lined with grand homes set back behind weeping willows and sturdy oak trees. As he approached his own street, the mood shifted subtly. Though the golden sunlight remained unchanged, an oppressive weight seemed to hang in the air. He spotted Mrs. Gable, a silver-haired elderly woman whose hair was pulled tight into a bun, renowned for her award-winning hydrangeas, standing by her mailbox, sorting through a pile of letters. Gage eased the truck to a stop, rolling down his window, longing for any sign of life in his hometown. "Afternoon." "Mrs. Gable," he called out, forcing a bright smile and waving. Mrs. Gable glanced up, her eyes locking onto the truck, then onto Gage's face. Instead of the warm welcome he had hoped for, her expression crumpled into something close to alarm. She ignored his wave, dropped a letter without picking it up, then turned sharply, hurrying back up her driveway with all the speed her age allowed. She disappeared inside, the front door shutting with a heavy finality that echoed through the still street. Gage frowned, his hand suspended mid-wave. "All right," he muttered, the smile fading. Maybe she didn't recognize me with the beard, but it wasn't just Mrs. Gable. As he drove further into the cul-de-sac, he spotted Mr. Henderson washing his car. The man looked up, saw the truck, then tossed his sponge into the bucket, quickly ducking into his garage and hitting the button to close the door. A chill of unease crept down Gage's spine. It was like walking into a room where everyone had paused their fight the instant you entered. The silence screamed. Beside him, Rook shifted suddenly. The dog lost his calm, pushing up with his front paws on the dashboard, pressing his nose against the glass. A low guttural hum rumbled deep in his chest. It wasn't a bark, but a menacing growl that trembled through the seat. The hairs along his back stood on end, rigid and bristling. Easy Rook, Gage said, though his own heart wasn't calm. "What do you see?" Boy Rook ignored him, eyes fixed straight ahead, unblinking, locked on the street's end. His lips curled back, just enough, flashing sharp white teeth. This wasn't excitement, it was a warning. Fingers tightening around the wheel, Gage's knuckles whitened. He turned the last corner, and there it stood, his house. From the outside, it was flawless. The white siding gleamed in the sunlight like new. The front lawn stretched out like a lush emerald carpet, trimmed to pristine perfection. Rose bushes lining the porch burst into vibrant reds and pinks, painting a picture-perfect portrait of the American dream. It looked like the home of a joyful, flourishing family. So why did his gut tighten as if he swallowed a stone? Gage pulled the truck to the curb, but kept the engine running. He stared at the front door. It was firmly shut. The blinds on the windows were drawn tight, shielding the house from the afternoon sun. No toys cluttered the driveway. No chalk scribbles decorated the sidewalk. There was no sound of laughter. "Mara said Jace plays outside every afternoon," Gage murmured, his voice hollow into the cab. Rook let out a sharp, restless bark, claws tapping anxiously on the dashboard. The dog was picking up on something. A scent. A sound, a subtle frequency beyond Gage's reach. The animal's unrest echoed through him. Gage reached for the door handle, ready to step outside, walk up the front path, and hold his family close, but his hand froze in midair. His police instincts, sharpened by 10 years on the force and hardened by a year spent in the shadows, screamed a warning. It was the same gut feeling he had just before a bust went sideways. The visuals didn't add up to the reality around him. If he approached the front door, he'd be walking right into their trap. He'd be ringing the bell, giving them precious moments to brace themselves. His eyes flicked to the digital clock on the dash. 4:15 in the afternoon. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows westward. They should be around back, Gage mumbled, trying to convince himself. Mara always enjoyed tea on the back patio. Jace played out in the yard. He wanted to catch them off guard, to witness that unfiltered joy Mara had described so vividly in her letters before announcing his arrival. He longed to see Jace sprinting through the grass. He needed to glimpse Ivy toddling right behind him. He had to confirm the reality he'd been grasping at for 12 months before stepping inside it. "Let's circle around back." "Rook," Gage muttered, his voice dropping lower, shifting from father to cop. He shifted into drive, easing off the brake. Instead of pulling into the driveway, he steered the truck past the house, heading toward the narrow service alley running behind this row of homes. The alley was shaded the air cooler here, bordered by tall wooden fences and thick, overgrown hedges. The tires crunched softly over gravel as he neared the back of his property. The tall row of arborvitae, the green hedge he and his first wife had planted so many years ago, blocked the view of the yard. Rook's growl deepened into a low, steady rumble of warning. The dog wasn't glancing out the window anymore. His gaze was fixed, locked on the wooden gate that led to their backyard. His body coiled tight like a spring ready to snap. Gage killed the engine, halting the truck. The sudden silence that filled the space felt heavy, suffocating. He looked down at the gift boxes on the floorboard, the running shoes, and the doll meant for the little walker. He drew a steadying breath, trying to calm his trembling hands. "Showtime," he whispered. He opened the door and stepped out into the alley. The sunshine lingered, birds sang sweetly in the oak trees, but a cold storm settled over Gage's chest. He moved toward the back gate, Rook pressed quietly to his side, both inching closer to a truth that would forever darken the daylight. All was silent in the alley, save for the crunch of gravel beneath Gage's boots and the soft, steady panting of Rook at his side. The tall line of arborvitae, that green barricade Gage had planted himself years ago to shut out the noise of the outside world, now stood like an unyielding fortress wall, heavy with pine and dust scents that normally brought peace, but today only stirred the sickness roiling in Gage's gut. He reached a spot where the foliage thinned, a small gap near the old oak tree where the branches had never fully closed in. His heart hammered hard against his ribs, a frantic pulse pounding out anticipation and dread. He signaled for Rook to stay low. The dog obeyed without hesitation, belly pressed to the earth. A wild drumbeat thrummed with a mix of hope and dread. He signaled for Rook to keep low. Instantly, the dog pressed his belly flat against the dusty ground, but his ears twitched forward, every muscle taut with a tension that mirrored Gage's own rising fear. Gage leaned closer, pressing his face through the scratchy needles, squinting into the dim view of his backyard. The world seemed to spin off its axis. Breath escaped his lungs in a sharp and silent gasp. The yard basked in the warm, golden light of the afternoon, yet the scene before him was nothing less than a waking nightmare. There stood Jace, but this wasn't the Jace from the emails, nor the vibrant athlete Gage had celebrated with neon green running shoes. The boy limping across the patchy brown grass was nothing but a fragile skeleton cloaked in ashen skin. 5 years old, his eyes were cavernous, sunken deep within bruised shadows, staring from a face stripped of all childhood softness and innocence. He wore a filthy, oversized t-shirt hanging off his bony frame like a shroud, riddled with holes and stained by dirt that told stories of neglect. And he wasn't sprinting. He was painfully limping. Each step seemed to demand a monumental effort, his right leg dragging as if the joint was stiffened or broken. But the horror didn't end with Jace. On his back, bound tightly with a rough gray strip of cloth, lay a fragile bundle. Ivy. Gage's frantic eyes searched for his daughter, the 14-month-old miracle who was supposed to be taking her first steps. What he saw was a fragile creature barely older than a newborn. Her head rested limply against Jace's gaunt shoulder. Her neck looked too fragile to hold her upright. Her skin was translucent, sickly pale, veins tracing a map of pain beneath the surface. Her eyes were shut, breaths shallow and rapid. This child did not resemble one who could walk. She looked like she was slipping away. Gage gripped a branch of the hedge, the rough bark biting into his palm, but he didn't feel the pain. He was paralyzed, his mind unable to accept the stark contrast between Mara's filtered smiling photos and the brutal reality before him. "Please," a voice whispered, dry and ragged like dead leaves scraping together. Gage's gaze shifted to the patio where Mara sat, seemingly untouched by the devastation. She looked as if she'd stepped out of a magazine, a dazzling contrast to the children's misery. Her hair cascaded in polished, glossy waves that shimmered in the sunlight. Draped in a pristine cream cashmere loungewear, set soft and expensive-looking, she reclined effortlessly on a cushioned wicker chair. Legs crossed with flawless elegance, oversized designer sunglasses shielding her gaze. In her hand, she repeatedly swiped through her smartphone screen, editing a selfie with detached focus. Beside her on the table, a crystal glass of iced tea, sweated droplets like scattered diamonds. Jay shuffled closer to the patio, his bare feet coated with grime. In his trembling hands, he clutched a cracked plastic tray, empty except for a few dry, scattered grains of rice that looked like scraps salvaged from refuse. Slowly, painfully, he lowered himself to his knees on the concrete. Not sitting, but kneeling, head bowed, as if a beggar presenting an offering to a queen. Miss Mara Jace's voice was a frightened rasp. "Miss Mara, Ivy's making noises. Her chest. It's rattling. She won't wake up." Mara barely glanced up from her phone. She took a contented sip of her iced tea, the ice clinking rhythmically against the glass. "I'm tied up right now, Jace. The lighting's perfect at this moment." "Please!" Jace whimpered, tears carving clean paths through the grime on his feet. "Just a little water for her, not for me. She's burning up," Mara sighed, a sound dripping with deep frustration. She slid her sunglasses down, exposing eyes that were icy hard and utterly void of compassion. She regarded the boy, her husband's son, not with fury, but with the cold, detached irritation one feels at a fly buzzing near their meal. "I told you the rules," Mara said, her tone smooth and unnervingly calm. "We follow a schedule. No food, no drink until after the live stream tonight. You know the script. If you look too well, no one will bother to donate for your surgery, will they?" "But she's not waking up." Jace's voice rose in panic. He shifted uneasily, and the motion caused the tray to wobble. Mara's face darkened. With a sudden, fierce motion, she kicked out. Her pricey slipper struck the plastic tray in Jace's hands. Clack! The tray slipped from Jace's grasp, spinning wildly across the patio, spilling the scant grains of rice into the dirt and dust edging the concrete. "I told you to call me Mom!" Mara screamed, her calm shattering explosively. "How many times do I have to drill this into your head? You ruin everything, you filthy little parasite. Get out of my sight." "Go stand in the corner." Gage felt his soul crack. The sound of the tray crashing down echoed in his ears louder than a gunshot. He stood frozen, gripped by a horror far deeper than anger. Jace didn't bolt, didn't fight back. He didn't even shield his face. Instead, the 5-year-old crawled on trembling hands and knees toward the patio's edge. He wasn't retreating from harm. He was reaching toward the scattered rice. Jace stretched into the dust, his small, quivering fingers grasping at the grains of rice now mixed with grime and soil. He didn't bring them to his own lips. Instead, he twisted around, craning his neck to press his dirty fingers to Ivy's pale, dried lips. "Eat, Ivy." Jace whispered, soft sobs breaking through. "It's okay, I found some, it's okay." He chewed a grain to soften it, then gently pushed the mush into his baby sister's mouth, desperate to provide her with any nourishment, even if it was dirt. Gage's eyes fell on the t-shirt Jace wore. A gray, oversized rag, basically a mop. And then the memory struck him like a blunt force. The bank transfer just last month, $2,000. The subject line, winter clothes for the kids and heating bill. He had wired $2,000, and his son was wearing a rag. He'd sent money for food, and his son was eating dirt. He'd sent his heart, and his wife was a monster. The truth didn't arrive as a thought. It hit like wildfire. It burned through the shock, seared through the paralysis, igniting a raw, primal fury in his chest. The man who waited in the shadows had vanished. The father had stepped into the storm. A guttural sound burst from Gage's throat, an animalistic roar boiling with pain and rage shattering the quiet of the suburban night. Rook attack. The command ripped out raw and fierce, charged with deadly intent. Right beside him, Rook didn't hesitate. The dog had been coiled, muscles trembling with the need to defend his pack. At the word, he launched forward. The wooden fence splintered inward as 100 pounds of muscle and wrath tore through the rotten planks. Splinters shattered into the air. Rook moved like a shadow, a swift streak of vengeance beneath the blazing sun, closing the gap between the hedge and the patio in just 2 powerful leaps. Mara's scream pierced the air as her phone slipped from her grasp. She scrambled back in her chair, eyes wide with panic as the beast lunged at her. But Gage's gaze wasn't on her. He was already dashing through the broken fence, his focus locked on the small, trembling boy kneeling in the dirt who looked up not with hope, but with the haunting, resigned stare of a child who's bracing for the end. The impact shattered everything. 1 second Mara was queen of her suburban kingdom, ruling her patio like a cashmere-clad tyrant. The next, she was slammed to the ground. The air ripped sharply from her lungs in a painful, rasping gasp. The wicker chair exploded from the force, flinging splinters and shards of ice across the concrete like deadly shrapnel. Rook loomed over her, a black and tan wall of muscle and shadow. He didn't bite. Not yet. He was a tool of the law, trained and disciplined even in his wrath. His massive paws pinned her shoulders down, claws sinking into the delicate fabric of her luxurious loungewear. His muzzle hovered inches from her face, lips curled back to reveal shining white fangs, a low guttural growl vibrating deep from his chest. A single bead of saliva dripped from his jaws onto her cheek, hot and chilling. Mara froze, her scream strangled, replaced by a desperate, high-pitched whimper, born from raw, primal terror. She stared deep into the dark eyes of the beast, knowing one wrong twitch would snap those jaws shut around her throat. Gage stepped through the fractured fence, not running but stalking. The fury that had sparked his command had hardened into something colder, sharper, and infinitely more deadly. He moved with the deadly grace of a predator that has its prey cornered. Mara's eyes flicked from the dog to the looming figure of the man. Her smashed designer sunglasses lay crushed beneath her hip. Her face was pale, stripped bare of arrogance. "Help," she croaked, voice trembling. "He's unhinged. Shoot him, shoot the dog." She barely recognized him. Not yet. Gage halted next to her, his gaze unreadable beneath the thick beard and road grime. His eyes, though, burned fiercely. He spotted the smartphone lying in the grass where it had flown from her hand. The screen still glowed, showing the messaging app she'd been using. He crouched down not to aid her, but to seize the phone. No, Mara gasped, her survival instinct briefly overriding her fear of the dog. "Give it back! That's private property." Gage ignored her, staring at the screen. His thumb hovered over the draft message she had been composing to him, to the husband she believed was miles away. "Miss you so much, baby. The kids are playing in the garden right now. Wish you were here to see how happy they are. Love you." The timestamp showed she had typed it at the exact moment she'd knocked the food tray from Jace's hands. A dark, bitter chuckle escaped Gage's lips, empty of any humor. Playing in the garden, he read aloud, voice rough as gravel. Then he flipped the screen toward her. Mara blinked, confusion wrestling with fear. Her eyes shifted from the phone to the man holding it. Mara blinked, her confusion tangled with rising fear. She glanced at the phone, then up at the man clutching it. Her gaze locked on those steely gray eyes, the very same eyes she had vowed to love 3 years ago. The truth hit her like a cruel, relentless blow. Her breath caught, lips parting. "Gage," she murmured the name unfamiliar on her lips. You're supposed to be all the way in Nevada." "And you," Gage's voice dropped to a haunting murmur. "You're meant to be a mother." Rising, he slipped the phone into his pocket. It was undeniable proof. Every message, every picture, every deceit, all evidence now. "Rook, stay," Gage ordered softly. The dog stood unmoving, his growl, a steady shield pinning Mara to the cold concrete. Gage turned away from her, unable to face her any longer. The sight was unbearable. Any moment could ignite a fury that would condemn him. But he had a mission that demanded his strength above all else. His gaze shifted toward the patio corner where Jasesi cowered, motionless. The boy was flattened against the brick wall. His small frame curled tightly, guarding the infant strapped to his back. Trembling uncontrollably, Ivy's tiny head bounced softly on his shoulder as his hands shielded him from the fury he dreaded would come next. "Jace?" Gage's voice cracked with raw emotion, struggling to stay composed. Jasesi flinched as if struck, squeezing his eyes shut in desperation. "I didn't steal it," he pleaded, his voice thin and filled with terror. "I didn't eat the rice. I gave it to Ivy. Please, sir, don't hurt me. I'll never do it again." Gage's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, irreparable and aching. His son didn't see salvation, he saw danger. To Jace, he was a towering stranger with a wild beard who had just unleashed a nightmare on his stepmother. Violence was the only language he understood from adults. Taking a careful step forward, Gage raised his hands in peace palms open. "I'm not going to hurt you, Jace. Never." Jace peeked through trembling fingers, his eyes wide, filled with terrified confusion as they flickered between Gage and the dog. The man before him was unrecognizable, unshaven, dirtied by the road and sweat, nothing like the spotless uniformed father he remembered. The man he had known smelled of aftershave, dressed in crisp clothes. This was something else entirely. "Who are you?" the boy whispered, pulling his knees close. Are you the police?" "Yes," Gage replied, dropping to one knee to meet his gaze. "I am." Jace let out a heartbreaking sob. "She said you'd come," he whispered, rocking, lost in despair. "She said if I was bad, the police would come and take Dad away forever. She said Dad has a new family now. A new boy named Leo who always finishes his dinner, and that he doesn't want a sick kid like me anymore." The lie hung thick in the air, harsh and irreversible. Mara hadn't just starved his flesh, she starved his very soul. She tore down Jace's hope piece by piece, replacing his father's love with shadows of a family that was nothing but a cruel illusion. She made Gage the villain in his own son's story so Jace would never reach out, never dare to hope. A tear traced through the grime on Gage's cheek. She lied, Jace. She lied about everything. No. The boy shook his head violently. She talks to him. She knows. Dad hates me. Dad loves you, Gage said firmly, inching closer on his knees. He could now smell the sharp scent of unwashed clothes, mixed with the faint sweetness of sickness clinging to the children. Dad crossed through fire just to find you. Pressed tightly to the brick, Jace recoiled, overwhelmed by their closeness. Stay back. Don't lay a finger on Ivy. Gage halted. No words could bridge the gap. Jace had been lost in a maze of lies for a whole year, words twisted like weapons against him now. Gage needed something solid, a lifeline from a time untouched by pain. His hand slipped into his back pocket. Fingers grazed the cold metal of his wallet. He drew it out and flipped it open. The afternoon sun caught the glint of the silver badge inside. It wasn't just a scrap of metal, it was a vow. But even more than that, it was a cherished toy. Before Gage left, Jace would sit on his lap, lovingly polishing that badge with the edge of his shirt. He'd trace the numbers softly with his tiny fingers, learning to count. Look here, Gage whispered, extending the badge. See the numbers, Jace. Say them for me. Jace hesitated, sniffled, rubbing his nose against his shoulder. He squinted at the shining token held by the stranger. 4, Jace whispered, voice shaky. 02. He faltered. His eyes lifted, searching Gage's face behind the beard. He studied the steel-gray eyes, the faint scar above the left brow, the one Jace had left by accident with a toy truck 3 years ago. 6, Gage completed softly. 426. Whose badge is this, Jace? Time seemed to freeze. The dog's growl, Mara's whimper, the rustling breeze all melted away. It was just the badge and the man's eyes holding it. Jay's lip trembled. His small, grimy hand reached out, trembling violently as his fingertips met the cold metal. Slowly he lifted his hand and brushed Gage's beard. Daddy, the word, a whispered wish, fragile and hopeful. I'm here. Buddy Gage's voice cracked with emotion, clutching Jace's hand and pressing it to his cheek. I'm right here. I'm sorry I'm late. I'm so sorry. The dam broke. Jace didn't smile or cheer. Instead, he unleashed a guttural cry torn from deep within his soul, a raw, overwhelming flood of emotion. The adrenaline that had kept him standing, the fear that had been the foundation of his world for 12 long months crumbled in an instant. Daddy Jace screamed, launching himself forward. Gage caught him mid-air. He wrapped his arms around his son's fragile, frail frame and the silent weight of his daughter. Pulling them close, he buried his face in Jace's tangled, dirt-streaked hair. He didn't care about the smell. He didn't care about the grime. He held them like he was trying to stitch their shattered souls back together with pure love and strength. She heard us. Daddy Jace sobbed into Gage's neck, his small fingers clutching Gage's shirt with iron determination. She didn't give us any food. She said you were gone. I know, Gage whispered fiercely, rocking them gently. I know. I've got you now. No one will ever hurt you again. Rook is here. Daddy's right here. Jace took a shaky breath, trying to speak, but his eyes rolled back. The surge of emotions combined with severe low blood sugar and exhaustion overwhelmed his little body. Daddy Jace mumbled, voice slurred. "I'm sleepy." His grip on Gage's shirt loosened his head, falling back heavy and limp. Jace Gage pulled back, panic flooding his chest. "Jace, stay with me, buddy." But Jace was gone, his small frame hanging like a lifeless doll in his father's arms, finally surrendering to the darkness he'd battled for so long. The world blurred into flashing lights and echoing sirens, slicing through the calm afternoon in Oakhaven like a jagged shard of glass. Gage had no memory of sprinting from the backyard to the front yard. He didn't recall bursting the front gate open with a kick. All he felt was the heavy weight held close to his chest. Jace limp and hauntingly light, and Ivy a quiet bundle of fragile bones. He stormed onto the sidewalk just as the ambulance skidded to a halt, tires carving black scars into the pristine pavement. "Help right here," Gage shouted, his voice ragged and raw. "Pediatric emergency, 2 victims urgent." 2 paramedics leapt from the back of the rig. The lead medic, a woman named Miller, bore a face carved from determination, her eyes sweeping the scene with cool, practiced precision. With graying hair pulled tight into a no-nonsense ponytail, her hands moved with a blur of urgent purpose. "Get them on the stretcher now," Miller commanded, swiftly pulling on blue nitrile gloves. Gage set Jace carefully on the cot. The boy's head lolled to one side, his eyes rolled back, revealing only the whites. Gage then laid Ivy gently beside him, the stark difference between the siblings wrenching the soul. A police cruiser screeched to a stop behind the ambulance siren, wailing once before falling silent. Officer Diaz, young and sturdy, with a fresh haircut and a confused expression, stepped out. He adjusted his belt, eyes flicking between the scruffy bearded man and the house. "What's going on here?" Diaz asked, his hand instinctively edging toward his holster. "We got a disturbance call." Before Gage could reply, a piercing scream tore through the air. It was dramatic, shrill, engineered to chill the blood. "He attacked me." Mara stumbled from the front door. Somehow her expensive cashmere top's shoulder was torn, mascara smudged artistically beneath her eyes. She pointed a trembling finger at Gage. "Officer, thank God you're here," Mara cried, rushing toward Diaz, but keeping a wary distance from Rook, standing alert by the ambulance. "That man, my husband, he's been gone for a year. He left us. Then he showed up, broke down the fence and hit me." Diaz's eyes narrowed. His gaze shifted from the filthy, wild-eyed man to Mara, the frightened, weeping mother in the quiet neighborhood. The story was writing itself in Diaz's mind. "Sir, step away from the children," Diaz commanded, stepping on forward, his tone hardening. "Put your hands where I can see them." "I'm a sergeant with the 4th Precinct," Gage growled, refusing to budge from the stretcher where Miller was cutting open Jace's shirt. He didn't have time for disputes over authority. Badge number 4026. "Those are my children, and she's killing them!" Mara screamed, clutching her chest. "He's unstable. That's why he left. The kids are sick, officer. They have a rare genetic condition. I've been caring for them alone. He's trying to kidnap them." "Sir," I said, "step back." Diaz reached for his taser. "Look at the boy." Gage roared, pointing firmly at the stretcher. His command was so commanding that everyone, even Diaz, turned their gaze downward. "He's attempting to abduct them." "Sir, I warned you to stay back." Diaz moved to draw his taser. "See the boy right there?" Gage bellowed, his finger sharply aimed at the stretcher. His voice carried such weight that every eye, Diaz's included, fell upon it. Paramedic Miller had just sliced through the grimy gray t-shirt Jace wore. As the fabric fell away, a collective gasp emptied the air around them. Harsh sunlight cast a brutal spotlight on the cruel map of suffering etched across the 5-year-old's fragile body. Jace's ribs jutted out so sharply they resembled the broken steps of a shattered ladder. His belly was bloated, swollen from severe malnourishment, but it was his back that stopped Miller cold. "My God," Miller whispered in disbelief. Jason's spine was unnaturally twisted, curving sharply to the left, a harsh scoliosis no child his age should ever bear. The skin lining his spine was raw, calloused, and ulcerated, marked with a distinct worn pattern. The unmistakable imprint of carrying a heavy burden day after day, hour upon hour. "He's been carrying her," Gage said, his voice breaking under the weight of the truth. "He's been bearing his sister's weight. That's why his back is misshapen. He's only 5 years old, and she's made him her pack mule." Miller ran her gloved fingers softly along Jace's back. "These aren't just pressure sores," she murmured to her partner. "Look at his shoulder blades. Look at his lower back. These are scars. Old wounds mixed with fresh ones. They were lash marks, pale white lines from months past tangled with angry purple welts from just days ago." Mara's sobs caught in her throat. He falls," she stammered, wringing her hands in desperation. "The sickness makes his bones soft. He tumbles down the stairs. I'm trying to protect him." And the baby Miller asked sharply, moving swiftly to Ivy. She peeled away the grimy cloth wrapped tightly around the infant. Ivy lay still as stone. Miller checked inside the baby's mouth. "Where are her teeth? She's almost a year and 2 months old." "None," Miller whispered gently, straightening the baby's legs. They bowed out in an unnatural curve. "Severe rickets, a devastating vitamin D deficiency. This isn't a genetic flaw, ma'am. This is starvation. It's a life robbed of sunlight." "I took them to doctors," Mara yelled, her voice rising, desperate to control the crowd gathering on the shaking front lawns. "They don't know what's wrong. I'm the victim here." Rook, who had been maintaining a watchful circle around Gage, suddenly shifted. The dog's ears pricked up, and he lunged toward the thick rose bushes edging the driveway mere feet from where Mara stood. Mara had made a subtle move. While all eyes were fixed on the horror lying on the gurney, she slyly slipped a small orange prescription bottle from her pocket and flicked it toward the dense greenery, desperately trying to hide the evidence. "Rook," Fetch Gage ordered, catching her motion. Rook dashed into the thorny bushes, ignoring the scratches tearing at his nose. Moments later, he reappeared, the orange plastic bottle delicately held between his teeth. He trotted back to Gage and dropped the bottle into his hand. Gage held it up to the light. Though the label was torn, the drug name was still clear. Furosemide Gage read aloud, his blood turning icy cold. He looked over to Miller. "What is this?" Miller glanced up from starting an IV, in Ivy's fragile arm, her complexion paling. "That's a loop diuretic. A water pill. It forces the kidneys to flush out water." Gage slowly turned toward Mara, the horrifying pieces clicking together in his mind. The dehydration, the hollow eyes. "You weren't just starving them," he whispered, the sick revelation tightening his chest. "You were draining them. You gave a baby diuretics to make her look gaunt for your twisted photos." "No." Mara recoiled, shaking her head in denial. "It's mine to lose water weight. I dropped it." "We're losing the baby!" Miller's partner shouted from the ambulance's back as a high-pitched rhythmic beep began to fill the air. Ivy's tiny body arched off the gurney, struggling for breath, shaking her head. "That's mine, just water weight. I dropped it." "We're losing the girl?" Miller's partner shouted from the ambulance's rear. A sharp, rhythmic beeping echoed loudly. Ivy's tiny frame arched off the stretcher, her limbs convulsed uncontrollably, her eyes rolling back as a brutal seizure seized her fragile body. "Seizure alert, bring the diazepam," Miller commanded, rushing back to the infant. She pulled out a portable blood analyzer, carefully pricking Ivy's heel as the machine worked for a torturous 3 seconds before flashing a menacing red warning. Miller's gaze locked on the screen, horror spreading across her face. She turned sharply to Gage. "It's not just dehydration," Miller shouted, her voice trembling with fury. "Her sodium levels are dangerously high, 185. Sir, this baby isn't merely dehydrated. She's poisoning herself with salt." "Salt." Officer Diaz moved closer, his confusion swiftly morphing into dread. "Hypernatremia," Miller explained rapidly, fighting to steady the convulsing infant. "Someone's been force-feeding this child enormous amounts of salt. It pulls water from the brain cells, causing them to shrink, leading to hemorrhages and seizures. If you don't look closely, it can mimic kidney failure. This is a method of torture. The world blurred into red. Gage didn't hear the sirens wailing as a second ambulance pulled up. He didn't hear the neighbors gasping. All he could register was the sound of his daughter's seizure and the cruel truth that his wife had been poisoning their baby slowly for internet sympathy. "You monster!" The guttural roar tore from Gage's throat, raw and full of terror. Instinct took over. He lunged at Mara. She screamed, scrambling to run, but stumbled over her expensive heels. Gage was on her in seconds, his hands normally steady and strong, trembling with the desperate urge to tear her apart. "You poisoned her!" Gage shrieked, gripping Mara's shoulders and shaking her fiercely. "You fed her salt. She's just a baby." "Get off him!" Mara screamed, scratching at Gage's face. Officer Diaz tackled Gage from the side, wrapping his arms around Gage's chest and pulling him back. Two other officers arrived, quickly joining the fray to drag the grieving, furious father away from the woman who had slowly orchestrated the destruction of his family. "Sergeant, stand down!" Diaz shouted, struggling to restrain Gage. "We've got her. We heard the medic's report. She's in custody." Gage resisted fiercely. It took 3 officers to hold him. He wasn't fighting the police. He was fighting the cruel injustice of the world. His eyes fixed on Mara, who now crawled backward in the dirt, clutching her throat. The mask of victimhood cracked, revealing the scared, trapped creature beneath. "Don't let her near my children," Gage gasped, his chest heaving as the adrenaline faded and his strength ebbed away. Miller glanced up from the ambulance, her expression grim. "We've stabilized her for transport, but we need to leave now or she won't survive the trip to the hospital." As the ambulance doors slammed shut, closing off the sight of his shattered family, Gage sagged in Diaz's grasp, watching as another officer handcuffed Mara and read her rights. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the start of a long, dark battle in a cold, lifeless room. The ambulance disappeared into the distance, its siren fading like a wounded whale's cry, leaving behind a silence heavier than any noise. The house at 4026 Elm Street was no longer a home. It was a crime scene. Yellow police tape fluttered in the soft breeze across the porch, where Jace had begged desperately for water, marking the stark divide between the peaceful suburban afternoon and the nightmare lurking inside. Gage stood frozen in the hallway, his hands trembling slightly. But it wasn't fear shaking him. It was the adrenaline drain combined with a creeping cold numbness spreading through his limbs. The air conditioning hummed steadily, chilling the sweat on his skin. "Sergeant," came a rough, weary voice. Gage turned to see Detective Hatcher stepping through the front door. Hatcher was a seasoned force, a man seemingly carved from aged leather and cigarette smoke. His rumpled gray suit carried decades of wear, and his eyes were forever narrowed in tough, skeptical scrutiny. He led the child abuse unit, a man hardened by the worst horrors mankind could inflict. Yet even he looked unsettled as he took in the spotless living room. "We have a warrant to search the premises," Hatcher said softly, respecting the sergeant's authority. "We need to secure proof of neglect and poisoning. Do you know where she kept the supplies?" "The medical records." Gage nodded, his throat tightening. "The basement," he rasped. "She always kept it locked. She said it was unsafe for the kids because of mold. She installed a keypad lock last year," Mold Hatcher repeated, a dry, humorless smile flickering across his face. "Right. Let's get it open." They moved toward the door under the stairs. It was a heavy, reinforced steel door, utterly out of place in this home. It looked more like the entrance to a bank vault or panic room. The digital keypad glowed a mocking red. "I don't have the code," Gage said. "We don't need it," Hatcher replied, signaling 2 officers carrying a hefty battering ram. "Bring it down." The first blow rattled the whole house frame. The second cracked the drywall. On the third, the lock exploded and the door swung open with a metallic groan. Gage braced himself for the smell of mold, for the damp darkness Mara had described in her emails. Instead, a wave of cool, climate-controlled air hit them. Hatcher flipped on the lights. Gage stopped breathing. It wasn't a basement, it was a warehouse. The vast room was lined with industrial metal shelves stretching up to the ceiling. On every shelf, arranged with obsessive military precision, were supplies. "My God," Hatcher whispered. To the left walls of baby formula, not just a few cans, but hundreds premium brands, hypoallergenic, blends organic imports enough to feed a dozen babies for a whole year. They were stacked in shining pyramids beneath the harsh fluorescent glow. To the right, piles and piles of diapers, boxes upon boxes sized from newborn to toddler. Clothes to racks heavy with brand new winter coats, designer onesies hanging with tags still on tiny shoes never worn once. Gage stepped deeper into the room, his boots echoing on the spotless concrete floor. He reached out and gently touched a soft, blue velvet blanket still sealed in its plastic wrapping. "She had everything," Gage murmured, his voice trembling with emotion. "She had everything." And Jace was dressed in nothing but a ragged cloth on the floor. She had piles of food. And Ivy, she was eating rice straight off the ground. "This has to be a hoard." Hatcher observed, his eyes moving over the stock. "But it's too methodical for a usual hoarder. This is more like inventory. Check out those tags." Hatcher pointed to a shipping label on a carton of vitamins. It read, "For the Fighting Family Fund, from Sarah Jenkins, Ohio." Donations, Gage understood in that moment. These were all donations. Gage turned away from the shelves, a wave of nausea tightening in his chest. His eyes caught sight of a desk tucked in the corner of the room. It looked like a command center. A high-end desktop computer stood surrounded by professional lighting rigs, ring lights, soft boxes, and a green screen rolled up neatly by the wall. This was Mara's arena, the place where she spun her tragic tale. Gage lowered himself into her ergonomic chair. The computer remained on, but locked, until he noticed a sticky note clinging to the monitor, password Hero Mom. He typed it carefully. The desktop burst to life. Opening the email client, he found a folder labeled Gage Sent. His hand hovered hesitantly over the mouse, feeling as if he were opening a crypt. He clicked it. Hundreds of emails flooded the screen. Selecting one from 3 months prior, the subject read, "Ivy's first steps, so proud." The message began, "Hey baby, Ivy is doing great. She took her first steps today in the garden. She's filling out looking so healthy. I bought her that pink dress you loved. Miss you. XOXO. Attached was a photo. Ivy stood on the grassy lawn in a stunning pink dress, her cheeks flushed with rosy life, legs steady beneath her. She looked like a cherub. Gage gazed at the screen, then shut his eyes, recalling the fragile, skeletal weight of the baby he had just carried to the ambulance. Her legs curved unnaturally. She couldn't even stand, much less take a step. He opened the photo editing software minimized on the taskbar. The project file was still open. It was a masterful digital illusion. He studied the layers: base layer Ivy, limp and pale on a bed. Layer 2 skin tone adjustments, adding warmth to ghostly skin. Layer 3 liquefy tool, plumping sunken cheeks to a cherubic fullness. Layer 4 background replacement, switching the dim room for a sunlit garden. Ghost letters, Gage murmured. I was writing to a ghost, sending money to a ghost. While Gage stared into the digital void of his wife's lies, Rook was preoccupied. The dog ignored the shelves of food. Instead, he sniffed deeply near a dark alcove under the basement stairs, a space cold as punishment. A thin, stained mattress lay on the floor beside a bucket. Rook emitted a low, threatening growl. He scratched at something hidden beneath the mattress. What is it, boy? Gage asked, swiveling his chair. Rook retreated from the alcove, teeth gripping a black object. He dropped it at Gage's feet with a heavy thud. It was a black nylon collar, with a bulky plastic box attached. 2 metal prongs jutted from inside the box. Gage lifted it up. It was weighty. Recognition hit him instantly. It was a tactical canine training collar, a shock collar made for strong, aggressive dogs designed to break their concentration during attack drills. But this one had been altered. The safety covers on the prongs had been filed away, exposing raw metal. He flipped it over. A piece of masking tape was stuck to the back, penned in Mara's flowing cursive, "Quiet time." The memory slammed into Gage like a brutal blow. That backyard scene, Jace whispering, "Please not so loud," and the scars, the circular burn-like marks wrapping Jace's neck, which Miller the medic had noted. Those weren't rashes. They were contact burns from electrodes. She was shocking him. Gage said, his voice flat, lifeless, and hollow. She strapped a shock collar on a little boy just 5 years old. Hatcher stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the collar clutched in Gage's hand. The detective's face hardened, shadowed with utter disgust. To keep him silent, Hatcher guessed grimly. When the live streams were running or whenever the baby cried, Gage replied. Both. If he cried, she zapped him. If he asked for food, she shocked him too. That's why he never screamed when she kicked the tray away. He was trained to stay quiet. Rising up, Gage's grip tightened so fiercely on the collar that the plastic shell cracked. Anger boiled inside him. He longed to smash something or set the whole house aflame, but he forced himself back to the screen. He had to uncover the full story. He needed to understand why this was happening. Dragging the editor aside, he pulled up the browser. The history tab was open, revealing the most visited site and auction platform, something like eBay, but for nearby listings. He clicked the first link. The post was fresh, only 4 hours old. Title read, "Urgent sale, 50 cases of premium hypoallergenic formula and designer winter gear for babies." Description: "My heart shatters, but I must sell these supplies. My children are gravely ill and can't tolerate regular formula anymore. We're selling everything to fund emergency heart surgery for my daughter Ivy. Please help. You're saving a life. God bless. Price $2,500. Gage stared, breath caught in his throat. The formula pictured was the exact brand sitting on the shelf behind him. The same formula he had paid for, the formula strangers had donated. She was playing a cruel game, getting these supplies for free by pretending to be a victim, then turning around and selling it for cash, layering lies over lies to beg for more money for surgery Ivy never needed. This wasn't just hoarding, Gage said, pointing sharply at the screen smudging the glass. She was turning their suffering into a business. She was profiting from their starvation. Hatcher leaned in, reading out loud. "Funding a surgery," the detective sneered. And on another tab, she was probably running a fundraising page for that very same fake surgery. "She starved those kids to make them look sick," Gage said, voice rising with icy clarity. The horrifying pieces finally fitting together. She poisoned Ivy with salt to induce seizures just to get a diagnosis. While they were wasting away, she sat down here photoshopping their cheeks to keep the money flowing and selling their food to strangers. Gage slammed back in his chair, which toppled and smashed against the wall. He looked at the orderly rows of formula, the perfectly stacked diapers, the soft blankets. This wasn't a safe haven, it was a dragon's lair, and his children had been fed to that fire. "I want everything seized," Gage commanded, Hatcher voice trembling with deadly purpose. "Every hard drive, every receipt, every email. I want her crushed by the weight of her own greed." Hatcher gave a sharp nod, reaching for his radio. "We'll strip this place bare, Sergeant. She won't leave a single secret behind." Gage's gaze fell on Rook, the dog sitting vigil beside the shock collar guarding it, like a snake coiled to strike. Kneeling, Gage gently placed his hand on the dog's head. "Good boy," he whispered. "You uncovered the truth." But as his eyes lingered on the black collar, Gage knew the truth was a weight he'd carry forever. Someday he'd have to explain everything to Jace. He'd have to tell him how the woman who was meant to love and protect him treated him far worse than a dog ever could. All this just for a few $1,000s and the praise of faceless strangers online. The digital forensics lab at Oak Haven Police Precinct was a windowless chamber, bathed only in the cool, azure glow of humming server racks and high-definition monitors. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and stale coffee. Behind a bank of screens sat analyst Kevin Chen Young, barely 25, with thick glasses, and a posture worn down by endless hours chained to his chair. Normally, Chen tackled his work with detached clinical curiosity. He was a solver of puzzles, a tracker of digital phantoms, But tonight, when Gage and Detective Hatcher entered, Chen looked pale. His gaze not on the screens, but fixed on his hands resting motionless on the keyboard. "Did you find it?" Gage asked, his voice taut. He had washed his face in the precinct bathroom, but the grime of the day clung stubbornly to his hairline eyes, bloodshot and tired. Chen slowly nodded, swiveling his chair around. "I found everything, Sergeant. It wasn't difficult. She never expected to get caught, so her encryption was careless. Brazen, really." "Show us," Hatcher commanded. Chen typed a command, and the central monitor flickered alive, revealing a social media profile on a platform Gage had never encountered before. A private subscription-based site, often reserved for exclusive clientele. The profile picture was a professional photo of Mara, worn yet resolute, cradling a sleeping Ivy. The username read, "Warrior Mama Oak Haven." "She runs 2 personas," Chen explained, his voice shaking with restrained anger. On Facebook and Instagram, she appears as an overwhelmed single mom, hinting at hardship but never fully revealing the truth. "That's the bait. But this," he gestured to the screen, "this is the hook, a private group boasting over 5,000 paying subscribers. They pay a monthly fee to witness the raw, unfiltered struggle of raising terminally ill children." Gage stepped closer, his eyes scanning the feed, a brutal catalog of pain and endurance. A post from 2 days prior, a video of Ivy pale and swollen, her eyes barely flickering open. The caption read, "The doctors say her heart is failing. The fluid buildup is worsening. We need the surgery, or I don't know if she'll make it to Christmas." There was a #Save Ivy Heart Warrior post from 5 days ago. A photo of Jace, shirtless ribs jutting out, standing isolated in a corner. Caption, "He refuses to eat again. His behaviors are spiraling out of control. It's so hard to love a child who pushes you away. But I keep trying. Please pray for us." "This is Munchausen by proxy," Hatcher muttered, crossing his arms. "But it's turned into a money-making scheme. Look at the donation ticker," Chen pointed out. "She's raised $40,000 in just the last 3 months for a heart valve replacement that doesn't even exist. She forged the medical records. I found the templates buried in her downloads folder." Gage felt a cold, piercing fury settle deep in his gut, heavier than the anger he'd felt back in the garden. This was no accident. This was a calculated operation, a business. "Is there video proof?" Gage asked. "We need to show she fabricated the symptoms. Her defense will claim the kids were genuinely ill." "I recovered the deleted footage," Chen said grimly. "The outtakes she erased because they broke the facade. I've sent the files to your tablet, Sergeant. You might want to brace yourself for this." "I'm heading to the hospital," Gage said, pivoting sharply on his heel. "I have to be by my son's side. Send it over, I'll watch it there." He couldn't bear to watch it under the cold, sterile glow of the lab. He needed to feel the realness of Jace to remind himself they were safe now before diving back into the digital nightmare Mara had unleashed. The pediatric wing of Oak Haven General Hospital lay quiet, a stark contrast to the day's earlier chaos. The lights were dimmed low, leaving only the steady beeping of heart monitors and the soft shuffle of a nurse's shoes on the linoleum. Gage sat stiffly in the hard vinyl chair beside Jace's bed. His son lay sleeping fragile. The doctors had begun a careful refeeding process, delivering nutrients slowly through an IV to protect his fragile, starved body.